It's a great thing, doing prayers together. So let's get into the lesson a little bit. Like I say, we won't be doing the Torah portion today. We're going to do a little lesson out of the Song of Songs. So let me see if I can share my screen with you. And the title is Behind the Temple Wall, in case you've ever wondered what in the world is going on down there at the western wall of the temple. Why are all these little prayers stuck into a wall, an ancient wall? What does that have to do with anything? The temple's not up there. What's going on? Well, this is your opportunity to find out just exactly what might be going on there at the kotel. Kotel is the Hebrew way of saying a wall. Well, there's a kiel. A kier is another type of wall, but the specific wall we're looking at is a kotel. And this is the verse we're working with out of Song of Songs. It's from Shir HaShirim, chapter 2, verse 9. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Behold, he is standing behind our wall. He is looking through the windows. He is peering through the lattice. And so in a previous class, we worked with Song of Songs 2:9, and we looked at who is the gazelle, who is the young stag, what are these symbolizing for us. So the part of this verse I want to look at today is, behold, he is standing behind our wall. He is looking through the windows. He is peering through the lattice. That's going to mean something. So standing behind our wall, the Hebrew word for wall that is used there is kotel. Yes, the western wall of the Temple Mount, it's called the kotel. It was a retaining wall for the ancient temple. And so standing behind our wall, our kotel, and peering through the lattice is thought to be an expression of Adonai's presence with Israel. So even though at this point, because we're in exile, he's withdrawn to an extent, nevertheless, he is standing behind our wall. He's watching us. He's looking at us through the wall. He's looking at us through the lattice. So it's up to us to figure out what's going on with the wall and the lattice. But first of all, let's look at the Strong's definition of the kotel, of the wall, and get a little comment here from Gesenius about what type of wall he's talking about. So it's pretty straightforward. A kotel is a wall, but it's from a root, katal, which means to kind of compact and to compress something together, to kind of squish it and push it together with pressure so that it sticks together that way. It can also mean to enclose people, like inmates in a prison. What do? Well, you take all these scattered people and you kind of compress them into this smaller space. And then the Gesenius gives us a little bit more explanation about the kotel. They say it can be made of compacted clay. So what do we know about a kotel? A kotel is a wall that gathers and compacts people together like clay. And what was the first human being made of? Clay. He's made of earth. And so think of Elohim building Adam. He actually did more building with the woman, but think of him forming and creating Adam and taking the clay and compacting it together to create the first human being. And so there's something about a wall that helps us to connect with our very creation. And I found this sign. If you can see the slide, I found a series of signs when we were in Jerusalem at a holiday. And what it was is just a series of scriptures about Jerusalem itself. And I loved, each one. So I just took a picture of it. And that's why it looks a little, maybe a little rugged. It's probably put up every year at that specific time. But this is from Psalm 122, verse 3. And it says, the built up Jerusalem is like a city that was joined together within itself. And in a few minutes, we'll look at that verse in Hebrew so you can see what the implication is there. But the idea of a wall as being something that is made of people, but is also compacts people, like it's joining within itself. There's an outside pressure that's compacting the built up Jerusalem, and therefore the people who are also Jerusalem. So I want to review something from a Torah portion back in 2020. It was in Vayera. And if we can kind of understand this, then the idea of Jerusalem being people formed of clay, compact together, is going to make a little bit more sense. And it starts with kind of knowing where Jerusalem got its name. There's all sorts of ideas here, but maybe this is the most commonly accepted. And that's tradition will tell us that the three patriarchs learned from Noah's son Shem in a place called Shalem, or in English we say Salem. And so if you see Abraham coming to the promised land, and perhaps he learned from Shem because the lifespans overlap. Perhaps Isaac also learned from Shem, perhaps, and it accounts for the missing years of Jacob's life in the what's written about him and how old he was when certain things happened. There's some missing years in there. Like, where did Jacob go? Well, the idea is he also learned from Shem in Shalem. And the idea here is Abraham brings his family to the promised land. Because you know what, there may have been better universities, there may have been better athletic opportunities, there may have been better economic opportunities in Ur or in Haran, but Abraham recognized a spiritual opportunity. And it kind of brings up the question, if you had all the riches in the world and you lived in Sodom, what good would they be? Because they're going to get burned up. But if you acquire spiritual riches, those will never be burned up. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob recognized that. So from the tradition, what is believed about Melchizedek, depends on your translation, is that he was really Shem, the son of Noah, and that Shalem was an earlier form of Jerusalem. And so it got, the Shalem part. And then later, when Abraham goes back to the place and he sacrifices Isaac, he calls it Yod He Vav He Yireh. He will see to it here. He will provide it here. And so there was a blending of the two names, Shalem and Yireh. So you get Yerushalayim. And seeing and providing in that place is providing, again, that perfect sacrifice pictured by Isaac, who was, quote unquote, resurrected as a type of Messiah there. Okay, just wanted to lay that foundation of resurrection. And what is pointed out in Ecclesiastes 12:13, it says the conclusion, when all has been heard, is to fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person, irrespective of your pedigree. It applies to you. And in Hebrew, it says, Kizeh kol ha'adam, every Adam, every man. And this is what the sages call Adam HaShalem, the perfect man. the person who does reverence Adonai and try his best to keep his commandments, this is the perfect Adam. And they say this was our ultimate purpose, to create this exalted human being in the image of Elohim who could fulfill his obligation to live up to that, to live as if he were made and created in the image of Elohim, not to descend to the level of animals. But he was supposed to rise, they say, to the level of the Avot, or the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so I think this is why we see Adonai consistently referring to himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The fact that the three with their wives are buried at Hebron is their, everlasting, at least until the resurrection statement, that they believe there will be a resurrection. They're saying, you know what, when my body dies, my soul won't be dead. My soul will not be separated from the resurrection of the dead. Pretty cool. See how it kind of fits with those first two parts of the daily prayer, the Avot and the Gvorah, the resurrection power of Adonai. And so this applies to every human being. We have to reverence Adonai and, to the best of our ability, keep his commandments so that we can live up to what we were created to be as Adam, or Adam, a human being. Now, when we look at the city of Jerusalem, and then especially look at the Temple Mount, there is something up there that is called an Even Shtiyah. Even Shtiyah. And that means foundation stone. There's a rock there. And it's considered fundamental to understanding why Jerusalem is so important and why the Temple Mount is so important, because this is thought to be the place where Abraham offered Isaac, and then Isaac had to make that decision to offer himself. Surely he could have overpowered his aging father. Instead, there's one midrash that says, where Isaac says, "Dad, you got to tie me tight so I don't lose heart, at the last minute." And it kind of sounds like what Yeshua said, in that relationship with the Father. And so it's known as the place where Abraham offered Isaac, the place where the temple would be built. But then other things happened at that place is also called the place. Remember, Jacob anointed a stone at Beit El, and he called it the place. And it kind of sounds mystical because Jacob anoints that stone. It has to do with the Mashiach and the anointing oil and the vision that he had there. But nevertheless, something to always to keep in back of your mind is in the Bible, not just in the Tanakh, not just in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. If you think of Philip or Yeshua, they could be in one place 1 second and be in a completely different place in another. They weren't bound by space and time the way that we are and the way that we think. And so they say that in this instance, when Jacob anoints the stone at Beit El, that pretty much somehow there was a supernatural connection between the Even Shtiyah, the foundation stone on the Temple Mount where Isaac was offered, and that particular stone that Jacob put his head on to sleep that night. But the idea there, and that stone is still there, by the way, even if you go up there today, if you were to be permitted into that locale, into that particular location, the Even Shtiyah, the foundation stone, is still there. And then there's kind of a sunken in place near it that's called the Well of Souls. So if we think about the souls under the altar in the book of Revelation and the souls being stored there under the altar, and then we've got the Even Shtiyah, which is associated with the holier places of the temple, it would make perfect sense to someone listening to John's revelation in the first century, because they would make that connection. But whatever was going to be accomplished by creating a physical human being, this physical human being would be able to do things that could not be accomplished in the spirit world alone. And so Adonai, knowing that we would sin, he says, it's worth the risk. In fact, it's worth the certainty that this man will sin and his descendants will sin. Whatever is being accomplished in us is so important that it was worth creating us, even with the certainty that we would sin, because there's something that believers in Yeshua will accomplish that cannot be accomplished in the spirit world alone. And that's a great reason for us to live up to that perfect man every day. Not that we are going to keep everything perfectly, but to not forget who we are and who we're created to be, and the hope that the Father has for us, that we will live up to that foundation stone, to that altar of sacrifice. I took this out of one of Ari Kaplan's books, and it says the most important single object in Jerusalem was the ark containing the tablets and the original Torah. This stood in the Holy of Holies on an outcrop of bedrock known as the Even Shtiyah, literally the foundation stone. The Talmud states that it's called the foundation stone because it was the foundation of the universe. It was the very first point at which God began the act of creation. And so it's believed that from this point on the Temple Mount, that in the Messianic age, in the days of Messiah, that the Torah will go forth. And it's also said that the prayers of the nations are collected there and then raised to heaven on the heavenly altars. And this is why they say at Sukkot, when the 70 bulls were offered on behalf of the 70 nations, that it was so important to the well-being of the world, because those temple altar services, and especially the incense altar, which was lit from the sacrificial altar, it was so important to the world because of the prayers that went up from there. So their understanding is that when there is a functioning temple, that divine spiritual influence increases in the world, just like the light of the world will increase. The menorah will reach, the light of the menorah will go beyond just the Temple Mount. In the Messianic age, it'll go all the way around the world. People around the world will be able to see by the light of the menorah. That's pretty cool. But there's got to be somebody up there obeying those commandments and living up to what they were created to be, for that light to reach the world. And this is why the altars were so important. They're associated with this foundation stone. And so we read in the Targum Yonatan to Genesis 2:7, and it's an Aramaic translation that's trying to explain to the average person the Hebrew text. And it says the dust was gathered from the place where the temple would stand. When Adam was formed out of dust, when he was formed out of clay, that dust, that clay was gathered from where the Temple Mount is and where it would stand when it was built. And so in this idea, what we get is, in the creation week, we know dry land emerged from the gathering of the waters. And so what happens? We know that water represents spirit. And then the dry land represents our earth, our clay, our physical being. And so Adam emerges from the dust of the ground, but yet he is a creature of spirit as well. And so especially when Adonai breathes into him, he especially becomes a creature of the earth, of the physical world, now in union as a creature of the spiritual world. So spiritual and physical merged together in the original Adam. And because this very specific dust of the earth was used from that particular place, it's hinting when we're reading the biblical text and it talks about Mount Moriah as the place, the Temple Mount is the place, or Beit El, the house of El, as the place. It's taking us back to that place of Adam's creation. So humankind, Adam, was formed from the Adamah, the earth of the house of God. You see why your heart longs to go back there? And why you bear his image? See that he has a heavenly temple. And the idea was for that heavenly temple to be merged with a physical place, and the human being was to be the priest of that merging. And so he was to bear the image of both the earthy, what he was formed of, and the heavenly, the spirit that was placed in him. And it was to be a precision balance, just like Yeshua, to be able to move into and out of the natural realm. If Yeshua didn't want to be seen, he wouldn't be seen. If he wanted to walk through a crowd and not be seen, he could. If Yeshua just wanted to pop in here and then be in the Galilee the next second, not a problem. If he was on a mission, then he did whatever was necessary. And there was no physical limitation to him. So that gives us a glimpse into what the original Adam was like and what hopefully we are also going to be like at the resurrection. But it also helps us understand the role of the Temple Mount in our own history. Because you see, you might say, well, I was born in Kansas. I was born in South Africa. Not really. You were born on the Temple Mount. If we go back far enough in your pedigree, you were born on the Temple Mount as a descendant of the first Adam. And so it explains why, especially when you become a believer, especially when you have a heart to serve Adonai, that heart starts longing to go to Israel. And not just anywhere in Israel, it wants to go specifically to Jerusalem. Because you're not just a spiritual child of Jerusalem. Don't believe that. You're more than a spiritual child of Jerusalem. Your very physical body is derived from its earth. And this is part of, they say Messiah will return when his people cherish her dust and her stones. When we cherish the dust and the stones of Jerusalem, they say he will come back. When we can say Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. And it's true, there is no makom like home. That's the house of Elohim. And so when, as a believer, we are resurrected in Yeshua, who is also the mikveh Yisrael, he's the immersion of Yisrael. He's Jacob's anointed rock. This is what happens to us. We want to turn home. We want to repent and we want to return to the place where we were formed, both in a spiritual and a physical sense. We weren't formed halfway around the world and then our spirit here. He says, no, you're one being. Remember, you're joined together, you're built together, you're compact together, you're one being. And so your physical body and your spiritual person, they come from the same place. And so, you see, even in Jacob's sleeping, it's a symbol of death. But see, through that rock that he slept on, and then it says he arose early in the morning. Well, that's exactly what will happen to us as believers. We may sleep a sleep of death, but at the resurrection, we will arise early in the morning with spirit, soul, and body. And this is why the souls under the altar are calling out. Their souls, it's wonderful to be a soul under the altar because you're in the lower garden. And you're having to rely on a robe. It talks about how he gave them robes and just says, wait a little while. Well, those robes function as a temporary body, but we want a resurrected body. And so at that resurrection, we all get our body at the same time. And well, there's a little bit of a delay on those who are still alive. Those who have already fallen asleep, they'll precede them just for a moment, because even if you're alive, you do have to die or you can't be resurrected. So you'll have a change there, and it'll be like in the twinkling of an eye, you'll be dead and resurrected. So when we're looking at the Song of Songs, we have to realize we're reading a song of return to the place, to the garden, to the Temple Mount, and the resurrection. And I took this from Rabbi Kahn's book. He says, when a believer returns to Jerusalem, he or she returns home in a very basic, elemental sense. The very stones of the Temple Mount are of one piece with our bodies. Human beings are part and parcel of the holy altar. And that holiest of places is intertwined with our very essence. Exile is, above all, a disconnection from the source of our spiritual identity. So the idea that there's no longer a temple there, and it's impossible to bring our sacrifices and our tithes and our first fruits into the temple, that disconnection, it keeps us once removed from our full identity. Because not only does it prevent us from going up there physically and bringing our best physically, there's still a little bit of removal spiritually. Yeshua even talked about it before he ascended. He says, I have to go, but I'm going to send the Holy Spirit to be with you. There's, I'm sure, times when we feel like the Holy Spirit is really hard to get a handle on, and we'd rather have Yeshua in the room just right there telling us what we should do. And I think that's what helps us to understand that little bit of removal. It takes commitment, it takes practice, it takes patience. It takes so many things to be able to hear Shema, the voice of the Spirit in our lives, but he will answer us if we are diligent. But this is the reason you long to go to the Temple Mount, even if you know that you can't get up there. There's stuff up there, different stuff up there, that there's not a functioning altar, there's not a functioning temple, there's not a functioning menorah, there's not a functioning priesthood. Nevertheless, your soul is still drawn to that place because that's home for you. Whether you long to go to Arkansas, whether you long to go to California, whether you long to go to New York, that's only one level of home. But where you truly want to be at the feasts is Jerusalem, hands down. So let's look at another place that's connected with the Temple Mount. And it comes from Exodus 3:2-5, and then also verse 12, because I want you to see the connection there. It says, the angel of the Lord appeared to Moses in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not being consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burning up. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. He said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Right. At this point, you realize the subtext is Moses might be on a Mount Sinai somewhere in the wilderness. I know there's 20 million videos out there on where the real Mount Sinai is. Here's the message, though. You're standing on holy ground. You are not in the place where you are. I have brought you to holy ground. I have brought you to the place. You may not realize it, but I have bent space and time. to bring you to the place of Isaac's sacrifice. And then he goes on and he says, assuredly, I will be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain. So Moses is on a mountain somewhere out in the wilderness of Sinai, at Mount Sinai, but yet something is different about it. It's been transformed in some way to where it's now holy ground. And then we know later Moses does take the Israelites to this particular mountain, to Mount Sinai. And it's there that they receive the 10 Commandments, and he receives the Torah. So even Mount Sinai is connected with the place. One tradition explains that they say, well, the Temple Mount just lifted up and folded down over Sinai like a blanket effect, not exactly like a blanket, but there had to be a shield. Remember, he even told Moses, take your shoes off. You don't understand where you are. But he wanted the people to be able to experience the divine presence. But we also know you can't look at him and live. So how does he solve this? He descends upon Mount Sinai, but yet there's a shield of protection between them. The elders went up, and it says they ate and drank on the mountain, and they did somehow gaze at the presence. Maybe they got a little closer to the shield between the two. But it does tell you that there was some sort of disruption. They might have been where they were, but they weren't exactly where they were. And just like Philip might have been in the chariot, but maybe Philip wasn't exactly where we thought he was in the chariot. So with these texts, they're connecting Mount Sinai as the place, which is what he says back here. Moses is at this place. And so he says, this place, the place on which you were standing is holy ground. He says, you're going to come back and worship God at this mountain. Well, if the place is the Temple Mount, there is some aspect of the Temple Mount that was at Mount Sinai. How that happened, we'll find out later, I'm sure. But this is how they're connecting Mount Sinai to the Temple Mount. It's a place where Moses encountered a burning bush that doesn't go out, but it's linked to a place, the Temple Mount, where the altar had to burn perpetually. The fire could never go out on the altar. And then from that perpetual fire, the menorahs, in the time of King Solomon's temple, there were multiple menorahs. They would have to burn through the night. It was also the place where the Torah came to rest on the mountain. Well, back at Sinai, the Israelites were told, prepare yourselves for the third day. So in a sense, Adonai stood behind the wall of the mountain until he descended in his glory on the third day to speak in the sight of the entire people, because it says they saw the sounds. They saw the sounds of the shofar. They saw the sounds of the words. So the entire people could see these sounds of the word, of the shofar, as spoken, and they say it was like a window for them. And this is what a window does. A window lets you see right next to you outside or inside, but nevertheless, you're not physically there. And they say this is what's occurring on Mount Sinai. He's kind of looking through a wall as they prepare for the third day. And then on the third day, they come down and he gets even closer. And it's like being able to see him through a window. So they'll be protected even as they can see the sounds, but yet experience his presence. Which to me, that would be so cool. And so it's thought that the divine presence stands, and that Hebrew word is omed, over Israel, because that's what's used in our verse in Song of Songs, where like he's standing, looking through the wall. And that word is omed, that's one word. for standing. But there's another word that you're familiar with from a few weeks ago, which is nitzav. Remember nitzavim, we are standing? Well, nitzav is another way of standing. The difference is with nitzav, the implication is you're ready to act. You're standing by, like if you work in maybe law enforcement or a first responder, if you need somebody to be alert on your next transmission, you say, stand by. Or if you need to go check on something before you can respond, you say, stand by. In other words, don't leave. Don't put the mic down. Don't quit listening. Don't go to another channel. Stand by until I get back to you. Something is imminent. Well, this is nitzav. That's what's different between omed and nitzav. And it's thought when we recite the Shema that the divine presence stands behind us. Is this not so cool? Think about that. The next time you do the Shema, that when you do that, his presence comes and stands with you. In Exodus 34:2, he tells Moses, so be ready by morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself there, nitzav, to me on the top of the mountain. So when we nitzav, see, if I say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and then I start talking about my commitment to keep his commandments all day long, no matter what I'm doing, the Shema is a statement that I am nitzav. I'm standing here. I'm standing by. I'm waiting for the next transmission in my day. Right? I'm not just standing. I'm standing ready when I say the Shema. If I wasn't ready to do what he said, I wouldn't say the Shema. I just keep my mouth shut. And so we're in that state of readiness. Like he told Moses, I want you to present yourself. I want you to stand by on the top of the mountain. Something great's about to happen. So they say that if Israel stands, if they nitzavim at the ready, when his presence stands, omed, he's standing behind the wall watching, then he stands at the ready, nitzav, to hear their prayers. When we're ready, then he responds with readiness. And they say it's like as Isaiah 65:24 says, before they call, I will answer. See, that's a pretty cool kind of standing. I'm standing by. What do you need? And so in Song of Songs 2:9, when the beloved is standing behind the wall, omed, that means he is standing to hear our prayers. He's ready to hear us say the Shema. He's ready to hear us, pray these prayers of resurrection. He's ready to hear our petitions to him for our families, for our children, for our grandchildren, for our parents, our brothers, our sisters, our co-workers. He's ready to hear our prayers. And then he's ready to respond. If we stand ready to do his will, then he stands ready to respond to us. And this is what they say is meant when the beloved is standing behind the wall. He's standing, we pray because we are standing ready to do his will. And then when we pray because we are standing ready, then he responds also with nitzav. I will stand ready. And so we're having this dialogue really between the wall. Even though we couldn't physically stand in his presence, in our present state, nevertheless, he's like that kind of blanket shield thing over Mount Sinai where we can experience him without being killed by that presence, by the strength of the presence. And so here's this wonderful picture I took many, many years ago. I don't even know if the sign is still there. And I'm not even sure which gate I was going through, possibly the Jaffa gate. But it had this old battered sign that said, in Hebrew, it says Likotel. In English, to the wall. And nobody who's going in that direction has to wonder what that means. If you're on this route, in other words, you're headed in the right direction, go this way to the wall. Because if you stand ready at the wall to obey him, then he is standing ready behind the wall to hear you. If you say, Shema, I want to hear you, then he's saying, I Shema you too. We say, I love you too. He says, I Shema you too. I'm right here. And how do we know he's still there? Well, even after the destruction of the temple, the Song of Songs uses the present tense, omed, right? Not amad, omed, present tense, to describe Adonai standing behind the wall, the kotel. In other words, even though the building above it is destroyed, his presence still abides in the place. And it's still the place to which his people are gathering. And had they not continued to gather there in every generation, whether there was a temple or not, then probably that place would be lost to ruins in history like any other place. But no, to this day, people are still going to the same wall. They are still gathering. Remember, it says Jerusalem is a city compact together. It's in unity, yachad. Psalm 122:3 that I read earlier, where it says in Hebrew, it says, Yerushalayim habnuya ka'ir shechuvra la yachdav. It's a Jerusalem is a built up city that is chavra. Chaver is a friend, a confederate. And so it's a confederation, it's friends who hold tightly together. And they are yachad, they are in unity. Not only are they friends, they are friends in unity. So what exactly is Jerusalem? It takes us back to the beginning of creation. When Adam is made out of clay and he's compacted together, you know, he's taking the very earth of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, compacting him together. And what happens is you end up with a male and a female who are definitely yachad before they're separated. And then they're separated from one another, but they are still chaverim. They're still closely linked together. And he said, a man shall leave his father and mother, and he'll be joined to his wife, and they'll be yachad. They will be one flesh. One flesh. So it's giving us the example of how many people can still be one. They can be of like kind and like mind. And in that way, they're like the first Adam. They're compacted together in the holy city. And so what does he build? He builds Jerusalem as a city of people who can be compacted together in a way that we've already hinted at, where space and time are not the same as we experience it today. So although the temple itself was destroyed, it was thought that the Western Wall would never be destroyed. It's a long explanation as to why they thought the Western Wall would never be destroyed. But linked to it, a tradition you may have already heard of says that the Western lamp of the menorah always remained burning after the others burned out in the morning, that they could always relight from that Western light if they needed to, which is that middle light. And so the Western Wall that we call the Kotel, it's not surrounding the temple itself. It's not even surrounding the courtyards of the temple. What it's surrounding is the holy mountain, or what is called many times, I guess in the Psalms, his holy hill. It's on his holy hill, they built the temple. And so it's the western wall for the hill, not for the temple itself. Because if it were for the temple itself, you would have to be, super careful in terms of clean and unclean and those sorts of things. But that's why some people won't go up on the Temple Mount, because they're afraid that they would be responsible for introducing an uncleanness onto the Temple Mount. But the Kotel, the Western Wall, is simply the retaining wall of the hill that the temple was built on. And it's thought that those stones are the lattices. It talks about he's watching us through the wall and then watching us through the lattices always. Why do they think he's still there? Why do people still go and put prayers in that wall? Why do they still go and pray and just pour their hearts out at that wall? Why do they dance and they sing at that wall, especially at feasts? Well, in 1 Kings 9:3, it says, the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your plea, which you have offered before me. I have consecrated this house, which you have built, by putting my name there forever, forever, forever. And my eyes and my heart will be there always, always. Is he with us in our exile? Yes. But are his eyes and his heart still there behind the wall and behind the lattices? Yes. Yes. He says, my name will be there forever. My eyes and my heart will be there always. That's why your heart wants to go home. That's why your soul is like a magnet being drawn to Jerusalem, because he's waiting. He can hear us where we are. But you know what? It's like earnest money. I used to be in sales when I was working my way through college. And if somebody wanted to buy a model that was on the lot, they put down earnest money. And we knew there were things that had to go right in order for them to be able to purchase the whole unit. But they would put down earnest money that says, I'm serious about this. I will be back. I believe in this deal. And you know what? Going to Jerusalem, especially at the feast, is putting down your earnest money. You say, I understand there's some time that has to pass. I understand we don't know the day or the hour. I understand I don't know if I will be alive when you return, or I'll already be asleep and my soul will be with you in that lower garden. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that the future holds me in this place. And I'm putting down earnest money. I'm putting down airfare to Jerusalem. I'm putting out a hotel bill to be in Jerusalem for a feast. And that's just, it's for some of us, I can't tell you what it's doing to us to not be able to be in Jerusalem at the feasts right now. We're like, Daddy, we're sorry, we ran away. Just let us back in, please. But we're learning something. We're learning to value her stones and her dust, because, before it was a matter of, can I afford to go there? And now if we had all the money in the world, we couldn't get there right now. And so if you've never had the money, he knows the longing of your heart. But if you have had the money and you put that earnest money on something else, and you never once bothered to go seek his eyes and his heart in the place where he has put your name, he says, I'm just on the other side of that wall. Don't you understand? Don't you understand my word is all about Jerusalem? Don't you understand? I never moved the eyes of the world and the heart of the world. They have never moved. I have been with you in your exile, but my heart is there always, because see, his holy temple hovers just above it, and it's longing to descend and once again marry the lower temple. And so if you've never even considered going to Jerusalem for a feast, I know you can't right now, but you need a mason jar. It's fine even if it's a piggy bank. I'd rather it not be a piggy bank, but if all you have is a piggy bank, get you a piggy bank and you start dropping your change and some bills and some things, and you start building that up until you have airfare. And then you build until you have lodging money. I'm hoping someday I can be that bridge for some of you who want to spend time there. But, just getting the airfare would be a lot. I'm hoping we can make a place like that. If that's his will and not just our will, I hope that happens, where more people could experience Jerusalem at the feast. More people could cherish those stones and those dust of the promised land. But understand, there is no place we will be at Sukkot, no matter how wonderful our Sukkot is, that will scratch the surface of what it will be like in Jerusalem. So understand, when you do go into Sukkot, when you do go into Pesach and you're not in Jerusalem, you are rehearsing, you are practicing. And you keep rehearsing and you keep practicing where you are. But if you're looking to the wall and you're looking to the lattices, he's gonna make the way eventually. Even when we read the book of Revelation, it alludes to this compact structure of the holy city of Jerusalem. It describes it as being a cube. And it even gives dimensions. And so if we know that the presence is residing in the holy temple above, and that the souls are compacted under the heavenly altar, which is thought to be the lower garden, there's an upper garden and a lower. And we know that those souls, just like the Holy One, the holy temple, they're longing to descend. See, right now they're withdrawn because of sin and because of the pollution in the natural world. But see, once that's purified, once that's cleansed, there will be a descent. And once again, the heavenly and the earthly altars will marry. They will become one. The spiritual will merge with the natural below. And that's what we as human beings, we're supposed to model for the world. And it's a supernatural thing when it happens. And what happens is place is not place and space is not space. In the Pirkei Avot, they talk about a phenomenon that would happen in the Second Temple time. And they said, never did a man say to his fellow, the space is insufficient for me to stay overnight in Jerusalem. In other words, no matter how many people came up to the feast, everybody could still worship. It was like there was capacity, and capacity didn't matter. If there was a capacity in the natural realm, it didn't matter, because no matter how many people you packed in there, it was always enough, and nobody could explain it, just like the manna. I mean, if I gathered this much and you gathered this much, but at the end of the day, we all had, exactly an omer, we didn't understand that. It was supernatural. It's the same way with Jerusalem. If you go up to celebrate a feast, there will be space where there wasn't space. And so now, what we do, or at one point until the plague hit, we had the opportunity as pilgrims to visit Jerusalem and to pray at the Western Wall, even though there was no standing temple, and there is no standing temple. Nevertheless, it says he is standing behind the wall in present tense. His presence abides there. He's watching for our obedience, and he's listening for our prayers. And you would sing the prayers of ascent, the Psalms of ascent, as you would go up. And those prayers affirm our belief in the resurrection, that he is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not he was, they're alive. Their souls are alive, and they're waiting for us They're waiting for the resurrection so that the city can be compacted together like clay people of one mind and one accord. And I believe he's peering through the windows of his covenant words in the places of our exile, just like at Mount Sinai, it was the place, but it wasn't the place. So wherever we are in our exile, if we will hear and obey his covenant words, it's just like he's right there at the window. All right, we're not there yet, but he's right there. We can touch him that way through his word. He's saying, I'm waiting to see if you're going to shema. Are you going to hear me? And I'm peering through the lattices of the wall around my holy hill to see if you will come seek me at my feasts. And that's why our feasts are always next year in Jerusalem. In our exile, we can't fail to emphasize that return to Jerusalem. We can't fail. Because he's looking through the wall. He's peering through the lattice. And this is what happens when people go to the wall to pray. They know he's close enough to touch. If it weren't for that barrier of protection he puts between us so that it wouldn't kill us, when you see people pressed up against the stones, it's not they're worshiping the stones. They're seeking the one behind the stones. And you know what? He says, I'm watching. My heart's right there with you. This is like our ET moment. This is where we connect hearts when you seek me. And if you can't make it to that place, you seek him through his word. You seek him through his commandments. He says, I'm standing here. I'm standing here to see what you will do. And if you will hear me and stand it ready to obey me, then I will stand it ready to hear your requests. And so I love this picture that Colonel Farley took when we were in Jerusalem a few years back. He was able to get in over on the men's side and take some pretty cool pictures. But just look at these men, which you can't see the women's side. It's right beyond them. But the Holy One is just on the other side of that wall. He's as close as our prayers. He's as close as our obedience. He's right there. So the next time you pray, the next time you say the Shema, the next time you obey a commandment consciously, think of it as him being just outside your window, right here, which my blinds fell down earlier today. I can see directly out my window, and I've got a bird feeder right here. And I'm as close to those birds. If I open the window, I could just about touch them. Now they can't really see me. They don't know that I'm here unless I'm right up against the window. And that's just like us. He's watching us through the window to see what we're doing. And we may have no idea that his presence is so near to us. And he's saying, just reach out and touch me. Just know that I'm right there. I'm watching you. I'm watching everything you do. I'm taking care of you, even when you think I'm not there. I'm just on the other side of the window. I'm just on the other side of this wall. If those birds had any idea how close I was to them, they would not be in that bird feeder. But see, we have the opposite. We have to keep reminding ourselves that we want to be in that place because he's on the other side of the window and because he's on the other side of the wall. Because if you look at this retaining wall, it does look like a lattice. And just imagine being able to pray there or to dance there. I want to show you something here. I have no idea if this is going to work. Okay, I'm just going to give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, we tried. But I wanted to give you a shot of people at the wall as Shabbat is coming in. Colonel Farley took this footage too. He was able to get a camera up high enough to be able to aim it down in there. I was literally myself, I was looking through the lattice into the men's side because there's a fence there and I wasn't tall enough to see over it. So I was just peering through this little slat as the Shabbat came in to watch them dancing. But he was tall enough. He could see over it and he could put the video camera over it. I'm going to see if it'll work for you. If not, we tried. I'm going to see if it'll work for you. If not, we try. See if it'll work. If not, see if it'll work. Yeah. Okay, so that horns, I know you kind of heard what sounded like shofars there at the very end. Those are the Shabbat sirens or horns. And so you'll hear that all through Jerusalem. You'll hear they've got like warning horns. If you're out, you'll hear the warning horn and you know that there's so much time before Shabbat sets in. And so if you're down there at the wall, you could see, I know the music probably wasn't coming through really good for you guys, and there was a lot of background noise, but you can watch the dancers and singers down closest to the wall. And the louder they sing and the faster they sing and the faster they dance, you know that you're getting closer to the actual second that Shabbat comes in, and they're going to blow those sirens, those horns that let the whole city of Jerusalem know it's Shabbat. It's just something you've got to experience. I can't really tell you about it. I can't tell you what you feel like, even if you're as far away as we were, and you're not right down there by the wall. It doesn't matter. You definitely know that his presence is there. And the idea that he's just on the other side, you feel his presence sometimes with you. There might be times where you pray, you feel the presence come down. Maybe you're in a praise and worship service, you feel the presence come down. Well, that's exactly what you feel there, except exponentially more. It truly is like a heaviness. You can get why the priests couldn't stand to minister when the presence descended. You realize you're getting a little bit of that because the temple's not even up there. You're at the western wall. You're at the wall to the hill, not the wall to the temple. And if he's just on the other side of that wall, waiting for his children to come home, I don't even know how to describe it to you. You have got to put that on your list. If you've never experienced it, even if you've gone to the land and you've not been to the wall on a Friday evening or at a feast, please put that on your list when you go back. Arrange your schedule where you can be there on an Erev Shabbat or during Passover week or during Sukkot week. It's like that all, for the whole week. So let's just pray, as we go into Yom Kippur next week, and then we go into Sukkot. Let's not leave that out of our prayers. Father, we are practicing. We know you were just on the other side of this wall of our feasts, but we want to go to the place where your heart and your eyes are. We want you to rebuild us as part of this city that's compact together. And it's just so important not to be complainers at your feasts. When you go into a feast, there's going to be things that are wrong, things that are inconvenient, things that weren't planned properly, things that don't taste good. There's going to be a whole menu list of things that don't suit your taste buds. Right, set that aside. Just set it aside and don't be a complainer during Sukkot. Engage it with joy. And then we kind of get the idea that he's just on the other side of the wall, listening to every word I say. If I complain about the food, he's going to hear me. He's that close. If I complain this wasn't planned well, he's going to hear me. He heard every complaint in the wilderness. And so he hears our complaints in exile. We're going to practice being non-complainers at the feast this year. And say, this is my earnest money. This is all I got. This is my earnest. I'm going to be a model Sukkot camper wherever I camp. So you'll bring me home. You're going to bring me home to your house because that's where I was formed and that's where I was born to be. So I hope you've enjoyed doing this with us. I'll try to look back real quick. Wow, lots of comments. I said quick. I don't think that I can do that quick. But it's so good to see you guys on here because I did want to say goodbye in case I don't see you live for a few weeks because of the feast. Like I said, I'll have to play it by ear and connect with you when I know I've got good Wi-Fi. But if something doesn't work out where we don't have the Wi-Fi to get together for a few weeks, I did want to wish you an easy fast. Not so easy that it's not uncomfortable, but easy in the sense that you're not so miserable, that you're not connecting to the spiritual food that he wants you to eat on that day. And I wanted to wish you a joyous Sukkot, and can't tell you, especially my regulars, you're on here every Shabbat, how much I've enjoyed spending this last year with you guys. You've truly made it a pleasure, because, if I weren't enjoying this, I wouldn't be doing it. I would be taking a nap right now. But you make it worth the meeting. And I think this is what he wants us to do, to become that city compact together wherever we are. I love all the Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. I see that you're calling one another's names. Thank you. Let's see. Y'all would like a thing on the daily prayers? We can probably arrange that. Maybe do probably can't do it on a live stream. It would be a little too condensed. But we might be able to put together maybe just a free online seminar via Zoom. I think I can get up to 500 people in on my plan on Zoom. If it was over 500, I don't think it would work, but it might be something that we could go through YouTube, and that way it wouldn't count against the number of people that I can have on Zoom. I don't know how YouTube feels about like extended times, but we could put something like that together. Yeah, I'm going to stay out of any doctrinal discussions today. It is Shabbat, so we're not going to light that fire. But I like the way that you're thinking out loud. As the questions come to you, you're typing them in there, and they don't have to be answered right now. A lot of times, if you're willing to put those questions up on the shelf, you'll learn the answers organically, and it'll mean more to you than just, like, I call it being clickable. Sometimes they just, they'll send me a question and they just want to be able to click on the answer. But it's not that meaningful when somebody does it. I mean, that's as cheap as the internet, which is free. But in building your relationship with the Holy One, if you have the patience and say, Father, I want you to speak to me about this question, but I'm willing to wait for your time, because it could be that I've not reached a maturity level at this point. There's things that you want me to learn first before you answer this question. Those answers will be so meaningful for you. Not that you can't ask other people about, certain questions, but don't be duped into this generation's technology frenzy and say any question I have should be clickable. Many cases it's not, because you might ask a question and I say, well, I don't know you. I don't know your circumstances. I don't know you. There's too many things I don't know in your situation, and just asking a generic question, you won't always get the right answer if somebody doesn't know you. And that's where I think that city compact together, he's building us into little communities where we can have those meaningful questions and answers, because a lot of times it would mean I would need to ask you questions to be able to answer your question. So sometimes I'll answer, sometimes I won't. If you send me an email, it's kind of a gamble whether I will or not. Most of the time I'm pretty busy on other stuff. A lot of times I won't answer the question, but when I reach a point in the Torah cycle that I think I can answer it, you might see it incorporated into a lesson later. It might be 9 months from now. It might be a year from now. But I might take your question and say, okay, this is not a one-line answer, and I'm certainly not going to sit down and type out 3 pages. I don't have that kind of time in a day, but that's a great question. So let's do a lesson on it sometime. When we get to that place, that's the way I handle that sometimes. So if you didn't get an answer immediately, it doesn't mean I didn't pay attention to you. It might mean that you'll get an answer if you hang in there. Otherwise, you'll just think I didn't answer. let's see. I love seeing you interact with one another. Tell Hasten, I said, have a blessed week. And you're right, Julie, the minute you get off the airplane, you feel his presence and you never want to leave. And for us, the first time, we felt it when we got in the airspace. It was the strangest thing I'd ever experienced to that point. I've had stranger things since then. But when we hit the airspace, you know how they'll dim the lights in the plane? I don't know why they do that, but they do. But we were watching it on the little, you don't call it a radar, but it's like a little map that tells you where the plane is. And they said something about, okay, now we're in Israeli airspace and you're not allowed to get up after now. You have to remain seated until we land. Well, it was about that point. We felt something. It got really quiet on the plane. There was like one of those still moments in a crowd. And sometimes it happens that way where everything gets really still. And I could hear a few like, and I don't think it was allergies. I think it's for some people on that plane, the realization that we were in that airspace, it hit us at the same time. And I can't even tell you what that was like. I mean, people are crying before we ever land. It's amazing. Yeah, so I guess I'll let you guys go and I'll try to go get our third meal together. It's been a wonderful day, even though we had this little interference with COVID. It will all be for the best in the end. So, keep us in prayer that we test negative tomorrow, because we don't want, if we're infected with it, we don't want to introduce it into a Sukkot camp for sure. But we have no symptoms so far, not one. So Baruch Hashem, and may it be so for everybody in our congregation, that there's just no further infection. And the ones that did catch it, maybe they just took one for the team. But thank you for meeting together with us and for bearing with me through a little bit of the prayers that we do. But it just didn't seem right to leave it out since we couldn't get together. And so Shabbat Shalom to you guys. And may you have an easy fast and a joyful Sukkot. And may this year to come be just an astounding Shemitah year where things divinely grow in our lives that we had given up on. Whatever you gave up on, and you just been working, you say, well, just let me take my hands off and see what the Father's going to do in the Shemitah year. Try that and just see what happens. We love you guys, and we'll see you when we see you. Okay? Bye-bye.